My name is Alyssa with the San Juan Salon-Water Conservation District in the northwest corner of New Mexico. And as for our Backyard Conservation Workshop video series, I'm really happy to spend some time to go in a little bit more detail on the biology impacts and management methods that landowners have in their arsenal to address Russian knapweed. And I'm sure most people who are logging into this video, this is a very familiar species to come across, and that is not entirely surprising. That is because out of the 3 knapweed species currently on the New Mexico noxious weed list, Russian knapweed is the most widely distributed throughout the western states. And due to this wide distribution in perennial biology, which we'll be able to go into a little bit more detail in a minute, Russian knapweed is listed as a Class C noxious weed species on the New Mexico noxious weed list. And this basically means that because of the wide distribution of this species, management concerns are best recommended to be on the local level, based on the land manager's goals, time and resources, and the services and the cost share options that are available. And as the local soil and water conservation district, we're really happy to be able to offer this assistance and beginning of accumulating resources for the local landowners who are wanting to address this species. First thing that I wanted to address before going forward is that Russian knapweed is actually not from Russia, as most people would originally expect. This originally evolved on the Eurasian continent, primarily in Turkestan, Iran, and Asia Minor. And it is believed, again, tracking noxious weed species is incredibly difficult, but it is believed that this species was first introduced into North America in the early 1900s in a contaminated import of alfalfa. So, we can cover over the biology of this species first. So what makes this noxious weed species so good at outcompeting native vegetation? First off, it is important to address that Russian knapweed is a long-lived, perennial, deep-rooted species, which means that the perennial nature of these weeds means that this plant can continuously reemerge for many years, both by producing seed and by regrowing directly from the roots. And so this means that more time needs to be spent in addressing the root system itself, not just what is on top, because that is what the primary reproduction method for this plant is. And even though it is primarily able to reproduce through the roots, it is able to produce seed. So normally in the early spring, after the first frost, is one of the first noxious weed species that we see that pop up in a little rosette. Normally by May and July, it actually bolts, creating that one main stem that comes up about 3 feet normally, and it normally flowers and produces seed between June and September. And so the seeds, although they do produce seeds, there's normally about 50 to 500 seeds that are produced by each plant per year. These seeds are not entirely mobile. As you can see, these seeds are quite large. They're very hard to be wind taken like other noxious weed species such as tamarisk. And so because these seeds are not entirely mobile in that way, and because they're most of the time encapsulated in these seed pods that you see here, they're not entirely mobile. And they only stay viable for about 2 to 3 years, which is fairly short in comparison to other noxious weed species. But where it doesn't make up for its ability to produce seed, it entirely makes up for its ability underground. Indeed, a lot of times the fields that you can see at the top of the surface, all of the reproductive plants that are occurring, that is just the tip of the iceberg. By the time that one plant reaches 2 years old, Russian knapweed has been seen to develop a root system that can go 20 feet deep underground. And these hardy roots are covered in these small, scaly rhizomes, which is basically saying that there is plant reproductive tissue that is strategically placed on the root systems that can produce its own plant. That's what makes its ability to be able to reproduce from the roots, and that is the most common reproductive method. And so when you see a large stand of Russian knapweed, it's oftentimes a monoculture of clones that are made from a single large root system. And not only that, but Russian knapweed has a really unique ability it is allelopathic, which means that it is able to release phytotoxins within the soil that really inhibit any other vegetation from establishing in that area. So once it's able to really start developing a root system, be able to get established, it's also able to outcompete native vegetation in that way. It's also important to note for other land managers, especially livestockers, that the stems and the leaves of the plant contain a specific type of lactones that are toxic to livestock and cattle and horses in large enough quantities. So with this arsenal of strategies, Russian knapweed is oftentimes develops into, again, a far-reaching monoculture that can really reduce the ecological and economic value of our land. Whether it be in your backyard, your fields, or in our wildlife areas, these stands can really reduce biodiversity of the native plants around and decrease the quality of wildlife habitat. It really reduces the amount of forage, really pushing out any other plants that are already food to native wildlife. And so we often can see a lot less use of wildlife during these areas because there are less palatable food around. And it also has the economic impact of reducing the value of cash crops. Anytime that you're going to be a farmer, you're really going to want to minimize the amount of weeds that are distributed in your product. Any type of weeds that are distributed can really reduce the value of your cash crop, and it can really crowd out a field that could be used for grazing, making any type of grazing that is infested heavily with Russian knapweed pretty much useless. And after this population is firmly established, it can change the chemical composition of the soil. One, by, again, releasing these phytotoxins, and two, there are recorded accounts of there being an exponential increase in zinc concentrations in the soil when there is a large population of Russian knapweed. And this high mineralization can really make it difficult for other native vegetation to stay present or reestablish. And one thing that's important to note is that this species can oftentimes really be a headache for restoration project managers. Oftentimes, initial removals of other noxious weed species such as Russian olive or tamarisk, when that is first removed and you have a large cleared area, oftentimes Russian knapweed is one of those weeds that are going to really take advantage of that introduced sunlight and can become very much of a headache, a secondary species that moves into your restoration area, making it hard for you to do any type of native plant restoration, not only for the space that it takes up, but for its phytotoxins that are released into the soil. And so this can be a very troubling primary species, having a field that is first introduced to this, or a secondary species that can occur from other land management activities. So what are the options to be able to control this very notorious and difficult to contain species? One of the couple of things I wanted to first point out is that it's important to keep in mind when managing any type of noxious weed that it is best to have a plan that details the when, what, and how of how you're going to be treating, the timing that you're going to be using, the chemicals that you're going to be adapting in the field. And this can really depend on a site-specific basis. And so it's highly recommended that, especially for the perennial species like this, there's going to be, anticipate having several retreatments year after year to really stress out and die off the root system. And also highly recommended to continue monitoring, visiting these sites and seeing how they're doing, any other actions that may be required so that you're able to best manage your time, your money, and your resources. And so for most integrated pest and invasive weed management plans, methods are categorized into 4 different categories. There's the physical, the cultural, the biological, and the chemical methods. And each of the methods under each of these categories is going to differ depending on the biology and the specific plant species that you have correctly identified. And oftentimes, a management plan cannot be done with one category method alone. Oftentimes, most of the time, it's going to be a combination of 2, 3, or all of these different methods that will make sure that your plan is most effective down the line. And so in dealing with perennial plants, and specifically with Russian knapweed, two things are going to be the main emphasis for any type of first containing and then being able to reduce the population. And that's going to be, one, addressing that there are no additional seeds that are popping up, containing that population so that it does not further spread, and two, being able to focus on killing the root system itself so that you don't have the same population coming back up and you can be able to start and clear that area out. And because of this perennial biology, one thing that is highly recommended is to keep as low disturbance in your mechanical method specifically as possible. Again, these roots are covered in scaly rhizomes that each of them can produce their own plant if necessary. And so when broken apart, these root segments, anything that is larger than a square inch, if shallow enough in the soil, can reproduce into its own plant. And so it's highly recommended to keep your physical removal of this plant with as little disturbance as possible. So no tilling of the soil. Oftentimes breaking apart the soil means breaking apart the roots, and it oftentimes can lead to many more plants in the next season. So that can really put anyone back with doing any removal. So whenever doing physical removal, it's highly recommended to do hand pulling or mowing before it flowers between June and September. That way you're really avoiding any more introduction of any new seeds. This is also going to be stressing out the plant and causing more energy to be done to reproduce from the damage that has been done. So you're also stressing out the plant that way. But this mechanical removal is not going to be enough. So even if you're able to do the mechanical removal and remove as much of the root system as possible, there's always going to be some left because they do always go so deep. So a chemical method is also highly recommended to be able to kill that root system. And ideally, the best time to being able to spray herbicide on to these plants is during the fall months. This is a time whenever all of the energy is being sent to the roots to be able to develop those and harden them up for the coming winter. And so if you're able to spray during the fall months, that is going to be a higher probability of the herbicide actually reaching the roots and having an impact. And there's a couple of different herbicides that are available to choose from with their own specific properties. This can be determined by if you have other non-target species in the mix. If you have milkweed or other native vegetation that are there that you don't want to be killed at the same time, the chemicals and the methods that you're going to be using for spraying are going to be different. But generally, there are a variety of projects available. The two using the chemical names are glyphosate and imazapyr. These two chemicals are non-discriminatory, so they are very toxic to most plants. So if you do have other non-target species mixed in or surrounding that you don't want to have an impact, those chemicals may not be best recommended for you. There are also a couple of others. There's amino-clopyraclar mixtures, and there's also picloram. These two chemicals are much more selective. They tend to go to more broadleaf plants, so there's less damage that are done to grasses and forbs. So, but it's highly recommended when choosing any herbicide to contact your local university county extension office. Oftentimes they're able to offer you great management recommendations, chemical recommendations, and one especially here for the NMSU here in New Mexico, they do have a cost share program available that you can discuss with them. So one, go ahead and contact your county extension office to find which chemical that works best for you. And always follow the safety label sheets that are there. Those are legal documents. Always follow those for your own safety and for the environment. Now, as for cultural methods, this involves any daily habits that can be done to help reduce the amount of spread that can be caused by humans and animals. So anytime that you're in the field, always make sure that you're cleaning off your clothes, you're cleaning off the bottom of your boots, the bottoms of your trucks, anything that is seed or other root systems that can attach to further spread. It's also great to be able to educate the crews that you're going to be with to identify this species correctly, to be able to know how much of a spread you have. And it's also important to keep in mind that with these management plans, the goal isn't removal of the species alone. It is to not only, potentially clear the land for any development or plans that you may have, but also to restore the area. Remember that this area, any areas that are infested with a large stand of Russian knapweed, if you're going to be removing that, you will be creating a void that can easily be filled in by other noxious weeds or by the same weed that you're trying to manage. And so it's always important to keep in mind doing any seeding, cover cropping, any type of plantings to outcompete new infestations and really reestablish native vegetation. And finally, for biological methods, there are a couple of native predators that are available for treatment of Russian knapweed. One of them is a gall-forming nematode that lays eggs along the plant and is able to really stress it out over time. This method is available based off of local areas, so I highly recommend looking up what is best available in your area. I would love to thank you all for joining this. I hope this was informative for everyone. There are also some excellent resources that are available not only to put together this presentation, but also that can be used for land managers to put together an invasive weed management plan. The USDA field guide for managing Russian knapweed in the Southwest is highly informative. Always look at the noxious weed list for your state. And don't forget that the local College of Agriculture, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences at NMSU has a county extension office throughout the state that can offer plenty of resources for you. All right, again, my name is Alyssa with the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District, and I wish you luck in your landowner goals.